Even if you were not alive on Halloween in 1938, and I was not, you probably have heard of the terror that spread across the country that night over the airwaves of the CBS radio network. Orson Welles directed and narrated the Mercury Theater on-the-air adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel, The War of the Worlds. It was the first radio play ever presented in a news bulletin format, supposedly chronicling the landing of men from Mars in New York City. A strident voice broke into the program with these words: "Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News." Now, of course, there wasn't any Intercontinental Radio News, but the gullible radio audience was catapulted into mass hysteria, and it spread across the whole nation as if it were actually happening. It took weeks to settle it down, months for people to believe that it didn't really happen. In fact, the reputation of the panic broadcast, which it became known as, has far exceeded the reputation of the book from which it originated. But The War of the Worlds was not H.G. Wells' only book about life-changing events on the earth. In fact, if history is any judge, it was certainly not the most important book he ever wrote. For in 1940, he published a nonfiction work called The New World Order. In his book, he wrote of the United States of the world and of the need to work out a clear conception of the world order, to dissolve or compromise our differences so that we might set our faces with assurance toward an attainable world peace. Now jump ahead in history to 1977, when space vehicles Voyager 1 and 2 were launched. You may not know that on those vehicles a gold record was attached, which was meant for any intelligent life that might be encountered along the way. Jimmy Carter wrote the message, and here was the message. This Voyager spacecraft was constructed by the United States of America, a community of 240 million human beings among the more than 4 billion who inhabit planet Earth, still divided into nation states, but rapidly becoming a single global civilization. We cast this message into the cosmos, a present from a small distant world. We hope someday, having solved the problems we face, to join a community of galactic civilizations. Thank you very much, Jimmy Carter. Obviously, he believed in the New World Order. But now jump ahead once more to September 11th, 1990. We're getting closer to the present. President George Herbert Walker Bush is addressing the joint session of Congress, which had been called to deal with the Persian Gulf crisis and the federal budget deficit. And in his address, he repeatedly refers to the New World Order.
A new partnership of nations has begun, and we stand today at a unique and extraordinary moment. The crisis in the Persian Gulf, as grave as it is, also offers a rare opportunity to move toward an historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. At this very moment, they serve together with Arabs, Europeans, Asians, and Africans in defense of principle and the dream of a new world order. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. And today that new world is struggling to be born, a world quite different from the one we've known, a world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle, a world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice.
4 months after he gave this speech, Bush gave another one. And in that speech, he talked about the New World Order. 2 months after that speech, he gave another speech in his address to Congress commemorating a successful conclusion to the Gulf War. He once again talked about the New World Order. He said, "Now we can see a new world order coming into view." Ladies and gentlemen, in all of history, there has never been a greater advocate for the New World Order than George Herbert Walker Bush, a Republican. Now fast forward once again to November of 2008, when Nobel Peace Prize winning former Secretary of State and Assistant to the President for National Security, Henry Kissinger, wrote, "Now that the clay feet of the economic system have been exposed, this requires a new dialogue between America and the rest of the world." And then it's not just in the political realm. The Pope recently, in his encyclical letter of July 2009, wrote these words: "In the force of the unrelenting growth of global interdependence, there is a strongly felt need, even in the midst of a global recession. There is an urgent need of a true world political authority." He went on to say, "Furthermore, such an authority would need to be universally recognized and to be vested with the effective power to ensure security for all." Even Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad called for a new world order based on world ideas. Now, what is there about a new world order that unifies the minds of thinkers and scientists and presidents and politicians and religious leaders? Economist and best-selling author Larry Bates writes, "I have said for many years that the term New World Order is merely a code word for one world socialism. As many have observed, the New World Order is not new, nor is it orderly. It is old. It is built on a foundation of chaos and confusion that is as old as history itself. In fact, the first appearance of the New World Order is found in the book of Genesis. I've called this the ancient appearance of the New World Order. It is in the 11th chapter of Genesis that we encounter this first attempt of a New World Order. The post-flood civilization, after Noah's flood, is described as possessing a unity of language, a natural nomadic element that caused them to journey from place to place. And at last, according to the text, they came to the land of Shinar, which we are told was a very fertile land. It is the place where Iraq is today. It is the historic place of Babel. And the Bible says they decided to dwell there. And if you've read Genesis 11, you know that soon the leaders of this first New World Order decided to build a tower to celebrate their unity and their power. This picture on the screen is, obviously they didn't take pictures back then. So this is a painting by a man named Peter Bruegel, who conceptualized the kind of tower they probably built. And this is probably very close to what they attempted to build. The two idols of their heart in Genesis chapter 11 were security and significance. The security to control their circumstances, and the significance of creating a city and tower that would magnify their name. This was an act of rebellion against God, whose purpose concerning the nations is spelled out in Acts chapter 17. You know, God established the nations after the flood. And these people got together and they defied God. It was their purpose to come together in a new world order and literally to build a tower that reached to the heavens. What was wrong with it? Well, Paul answered that question for us when he spoke to the Athenians in Acts chapter 17. I never really saw the significance of this passage before, but listen to what he said in Acts 17, 26 and 27. And God has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth. And God has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us. God scattered men and set the boundaries of their habitation, according to Paul, so that men would seek after God. But the people of Babel decided not to seek after God. They decided to seek their own self-interest, and relying on their own powers, they would reach up to God. This original New World Order was driven by pride and self-sufficiency and fear and rebellion. It was a clear echo of Satan's ambition, as described by Isaiah. "I will ascend into heaven," said Satan. "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High." The men and women of the Babylonian culture, the first New World Order, decided to defy God's separation of the nations and come together and build their own world and become their own God. And God knew that this first attempt to build a new world order would succeed beyond the wildest dreams of its founders. And the danger of such a plan to future generations and the threat of this man-made order to the people of faith was so great that God determined to shut it down in its inception. And I love the way Eugene Peterson describes what happened as he paraphrases Genesis chapter 11. Here's what he says. God came down to look over the city and the tower those people had built. And God took one look and he said, "One people, one language. Why, this is only a first step. No telling what they'll come up with next. They'll stop at nothing. Come, we'll go down and garble their speech so they won't understand each other." Then God scattered them from there all over the world, and they had to quit building the city. That is how it came to be called Babel, because God turned their language into Babel. And there God scattered them all over the world. Prophecy student David Breeze has written, "I think we need to understand, people, that political internationalism is not the will of God. Nationalism is God's will. God believes in the sovereignty of nations, and he has ordained individual nations and not a complex of nations. When men try in their own unregenerate power to put together a complex of nations and make them cohere without God, then you have built into the complex the seeds of its own destruction. And that's exactly what will happen to the future world order that men are working on now." I had been reading Max Lucado's book on fear. This never happens to me. Read a book on another subject, and in that book there's something about what you're preaching on that has nothing to do with the title of the book. But lo and behold, in the midst of Max Lucado's book on fear are these words about the Tower of Babel. The nations that spread out after Noah's flood decided to circle their wagons. "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Lucado writes, "Do you detect the fear in those words? The people feared being scattered and separated. Yet rather than turn to God, they turned to stuff. They accumulated and they stacked. They collected and they built. News of their efforts would reach the heavens and keep their enemies at a distance. The city motto of Babel was this: the more you hoard, the safer you are. So they hoarded. They heaped stones and bricks and mutual funds and IRAs and savings accounts. I don't think so. They stockpiled pensions, possessions, and property, and their tower of stuff grew so tall they got neck aches looking at it. We are safe, they announced at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. No, you aren't, God said. And the Babel builders began to babble. The city of one language became the glossolalia of the United Nations without the interpreters. Doesn't God invoke identical correction today, wrote Lucado? We engineer stock and investment levies. We take cover behind the hedge of hedge funds. We trust annuities and pensions to the point that balance statements determine our mood levels. But then come the Katrina-level recessions and the downturns, and the confusion begins all over again. In this first New World Order at Shinar, mankind builds a city and a tower to distance themselves from God and assert their independence. However, the Bible ends with the New Jerusalem coming down to earth from heaven so that God can be with his people. The ancient appearance of a new world order. This stuff we're dealing with right now began in Genesis chapter 11. Can you get over it? So now let me tell you about a modern attempt at a new world order. Our current attempt at a new world order is symbolized by the United Nations, headquartered in New York City. Now, you may not know this, but we fund that organization more than any other nation in the world. At the same time, we are at the wrong end of the criticisms of every nation that's a part of it. Kind of a strange thing. Now, the United Nations is an interesting picture of the New World Order. For instance, there's an 18-acre campus within the city of New York. It is actually international territory, the sovereign territory of the world, not the property of New York, not the property of New York State, and not the property of our nation. It exists in a vacuum in the city of New York. And it's interesting if you visit the United Nations to see how much of biblical stuff is there. Totally misunderstood, but there nonetheless. For instance, there's a mosaic called the Dove of Peace given by the Vatican. There is a peace bell from Japan. There's a statue called Let Us Beat Swords into Plowshares from Russia. Here's my favorite. There's a bronze .45 caliber revolver twisted into a knot, a gift from Luxembourg. Everywhere you look around the United Nations grounds, there are artist renderings portraying the world's desire for peace. Within the United Nations Security Council, which is primarily responsible for maintaining the peace and security of member nations, is an immense stained glass window, the creation of artist Marc Chagall. It's called the Peace Window. And the window is divided into two spheres by the tree of the Garden of Eden. At the bottom, close to the tree's root, is the snake, while the cross of Christ is depicted at the top right center in the corner. Chagall reportedly took his inspiration for this masterpiece from the Bible. But for all of its good intentions, the United Nations, since its inception, has been an example of bureaucracy run amok. It is overrun with fraud and pointless debates and international mismanagement and ludicrous behavior. For instance, in 2005, under the Secretary General Kofi Annan, the United Nations had been charged with investigating human rights abuses in member nations. In 2006, the Human Rights Commission was put together, including these members: Sudan, Zimbabwe, China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. Every single one of these countries have themselves been accused of major human rights violations. It sounds like sending the fox to guard the hen house. In Rwanda, the United Nations peacekeepers did nothing to prevent 800,000 Tutsi deaths. In Bosnia, UN peacekeepers failed to protect approximately 8,000 Serbs. In Darfur, some of the worst human rights abuses of recent times continue, despite UN peacekeeper presence. But perhaps the greatest failure of the United Nations is her unfaithfulness to member nations. In 2005, former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan went on record with this pledge of support for Israel. He said, "A United Nations that fails to be at the forefront of the fight against anti-Semitism undermines its future. That obligation binds us to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel." But it was only words, because Israel continues to be the number 2 enemy of the United Nations. And here's a sad illustration of that. Since 1977, every November 29th, the United Nations has held an International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. But shamefully, the United Nations waited until January 2005 to commemorate the Holocaust of the Jewish people, the worst tragedy in the history of the world, and they reluctantly recognize it. Let's face it, folks. when Hugo Chavez, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and Muammar Gaddafi are invited to hold court in the General Assembly, as they did recently, one could hardly consider the UN to be serious about world peace. Now, I have some good news for you. I've talked to you about the ancient appearance of the New World Order, the modern attempt at a New World Order. I want to tell you about the future arrival of a New World Order. Did you know there is a New World Order coming, and it's a good one? In fact, the future New World Order is commonly referred to as the millennium. Now, what is the millennium? You all have heard it. Some of you think the millennium is the period of time during which I preach every Sunday. No, that's not right. The millennium is made up of two words, mille and annum, which means 1,000 years. So the millennium is a period of 1,000 years. And it will take place, now watch this, we're in the period of grace right now. The next event on the scene is the rapture of the church when Christ comes to get all of his saints. Then there's 7 years of tribulation on earth. And at the end of that 7-year tribulation, Christ will come back with his saints and set up his kingdom on this earth. And he will rule and reign on this earth for 1,000 years. 6 times in Revelation 20:1-7, you will see the words 1,000. After humans have exhausted every way to create peace and to govern themselves apart from God, after they have tried everything from the Tower of Babel to the United Nations, Jesus Christ will come to this earth and set up his government over all nations and peoples, and at last the world will live in peace. Many passages in the Old Testament describe this as a period of peace which will extend even to the animal kingdom. Those of you who worry about whether your pets go to heaven, I don't know, but God has a plan for them in the millennium, so hang on. According to the prophet Isaiah, lambs will be able to live in peace with wolves. Goats will live in peace with leopards. Calves will lie down with lions, and cows and bears will be friends. And little children will be able to play near poisonous snakes and not be in danger. You want to read about it, it's in Isaiah 11. This 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ, this final arriving New World Order, will bring an end to all war. Isaiah 2:4 says, they will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. At last there will be a time of peace when war will be no longer a term in our discussion, and Jesus Christ will rule and reign over the whole world. The Bible says the millennium will be a time of justice and prosperity. Psalm 72 speaks of the people of righteousness and justice being brought to the poor of the people and children of the needy. You talk about the good days. God has a plan for us. But he is the only one who can bring it to pass. He is the only one who can create this peace. And one of the things that is happening now is we're just going through the motions of demonstrating for the whole world how impossible it is to have peace without God. During this period of time, we're told that King David will be resurrected from the dead, and he will be a co-regent with Jesus Christ. He will reign alongside of Jesus Christ during the millennium. And not until that time will there be a new world order, and any attempt to create world peace before then is doomed to failure. Now, that is an issue that creates some tension for a lot of Christians, and so let me see if I can unravel it. Does the Bible not say that you and I are to be people of peace? In fact, Romans 12:18 puts it this way. Romans 12:18 says, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. That is certainly a good instruction given to each of us individually, but it's not a national instruction. Do we want to have peace? Yes. But in a world that is fraught with sinfulness and evil and the desire to control, peace is only possible in a world like ours through strength. We are safe today because we are strong today. As we allow our strength to be taken from us through decisions that are made in order to make us more acceptable to the politic of the world, we will become not more safe, we will become less safe. I have written down in my notes somewhere a little statement somebody gave me years ago that goes like this: prize fighters and linebackers don't get mugged. And you know, it's an important thing for us to remember that the reason we're safe today in this hostile world is not because everybody loves us, but because everybody fears us. And we are safe because we are strong. I hope we never lose sight of that. And we're going to find out in the near future whether or not that will prevail. Should we be men and women of peace? Yes. Should we try to work out peace? But you see, one of the things about peace is peace demands concession. And there is a peace that we can create that gives away everything that's worthwhile to us. And we must be careful that we do not do that. So why is it that we should not pursue a one world order and make it our objective as a nation? Here's the first reason. The New World Order promises a peace it can't produce. Did you know that? Worldwide peace, nothing's more longed for than peace. We all want peace. Human wisdom cries out for peace, and the only hope for the survival of our world. We all want peace, but there is no peace apart from God. After all the years and all the attempts at peace, we find ourselves at war. We've been at war almost continually. Every peace treaty that we sign with other nations, even including NATO, is violated every time you turn around. As the world conditions continue to worsen, we are heading toward the promise of a peace by a world dictator who will come and say, I will provide peace for you. We know him as the Antichrist. And the Bible says he will use peace to manipulate the world. He will promise peace, and by that time everybody will be so hungry for peace, they'll be willing to give away anything. And he will take control of the world. And that false peace will be in its early stages when Jesus Christ comes back for the church. It will fully unfold at the beginning of the tribulation period. And the Apostle Paul describes that like this: when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. The Antichrist will use this false promise of peace to lull the nations asleep while he sets up his reign of terror and destruction. And Daniel says, by peace he shall destroy many. By peace he shall destroy. This false peace of the Antichrist represents the very best that man can do without Jesus Christ. Isaiah 57:21 says, there is no peace, says my God, for the wicked. The problem with setting up a new world order is it promises something it can't deliver. You know why? Because every nation that's in the new world order is filled with leaders who have corrupt hearts. The Bible says all men are sinful before God. And every man who gets into a place of leadership wants to control. The Bible doesn't say this, but a long time ago, Lord Acton said it. He said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the quest for power destroys the possibility of world peace. Secondly, it presumes a unity that is impossible. Everybody wants us all to just get along. Can't we just be one? There can never be peace when evil people are the architects. You've heard me say this before. One of my favorite C.S. Lewis quotings is this: no clever arrangement of rotten eggs will make a good omelet. And that's true. It promises a peace it can't produce. It presumes a unity that is impossible. And then what we're learning is it paves the way for a one world leader. And we have seen this happen over the years. We've seen it in history. I wish I had time to tell you the story of Germany and what happened in Germany with Hitler. Everywhere you look in history, you find a similar scenario where people get desperate and they look to a leader, and the leader takes advantage of their desperation and their crisis and leads them to an even worse situation than they could ever have imagined. Today, men and women in this world are looking for a leader They're looking for someone who can make the pain go away, who can put the money back in their portfolios, who can give them a sense that maybe their children will be all right in the next generation. And as many of you know, they care not about the nature or the heart of the leader as long as he can deliver on his promise. And the Bible tells us in Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 that such a leader is coming. He will come upon this world with great charisma. He will be physically attractive, an outstanding orator, a man of great cruelty, and a spiritual bent as a cultic leader, and he will take control of the world, and they will be eating out of his hands. And we know this world leader as the Antichrist. Finally, we cannot pursue a world order today because it promises a peace it can't produce, presumes a unity that's impossible, it paves the way for a one-world ruler, and then fourthly, it produces the roadmap for a global economy. In the midst of our current global financial crisis, Nicolas Sarkozy, president of France, said, "We have attempted for years to achieve something. The crisis must be used as a chance that history does not repeat itself. We need," said Sarkozy, "we need an answer to this crisis." And according to him, that answer is in a man who can help us renew the global framework of our economy. The New World Order is all about the consolidation of power. That's what it's all about. It's about bringing everybody together so that one person can control everything. That only works if the one person is Jesus Christ. You can trust him. He never fails. He never outpromises. He never does not do what he says he will do. He has never before in history sinned. He is the perfect ruler for a new world order. And while we are watching what happens in our culture today, we need to be very vigilant as the people of God. Not to just grab hold of the sound good stuff, the feel good stuff, but to step back for a moment and say, is this contributing to our nation or is this contributing to the world? Are we concerned about the world? Yes, but God has called us here. We are in our boundaries according to Acts 17. We're living in our zone, and this nation has been great because the people of this nation have taken seriously the importance of building a strong nation with integrity that could manage itself in the world. We are not by any means the largest nation, but we are the most powerful nation in the world, and there's a reason for that. We have not been globalists. We have not been internationalists. We have been nationalists. And somehow what's happened to us in these last years is we're losing the sense of our national pride. And people are angry about it. And tea parties are happening everywhere because they begin to sense that we're pulling out of the fabric of our nation the very thing that made it what it is today. When somebody's got to stand up and say, that's enough. We are a nation under God. Do not take that away from us. In God we trust is on our money. Do not take that away from us. And so in these days, as we look out at what's happening, nobody wants to be a critic. I have no desire to trade in my pulpit for a soapbox. But I want to tell you, I'm concerned as a biblical student that we are falling into the trap of the New World Order that will lead us down a pathway toward destruction. Let's ask God to give us wisdom. And let me just conclude with this. Without Jesus Christ, there is no peace. Do we all understand that? Let me tell you what I mean. Without Jesus Christ, there's no peace in the world. Without Jesus Christ, there's no peace in the nation. Without Jesus Christ, there's no peace in the churches. Without Jesus Christ, there's no peace in the family. And without Jesus Christ, there's no peace in your heart. If you don't know Jesus Christ, you can't have peace. Not lasting peace. Oh, you may have moments of the loss of anxiety, but you will never have lasting peace. Jesus Christ is called the Prince of Peace. Say that with me. The Prince of Peace. He is the Prince of Peace for the world. He's the Prince of Peace for the nations. He's the Prince of Peace for the churches. He's the Prince of Peace for your family, and He's the Prince of Peace for your heart. And if you don't know Him, it begins at the end of my list. You start finding peace in your heart. And then you discover it starts to bring peace to your family. And then your family becomes a part of a church, and you bring that peace to the church. And the church brings the peace to the nations, and the nations bring the peace to the world. But all of it is centered in Jesus Christ. We honor and glorify Him today. He is the one who is the peacekeeper of the world.